The farmer. About a year ago, I had an unsettling experience during my weekend shifts as a hospice nurse. My work often took me to remote areas late at night, where poor cell reception and the eerie quietness were constant companions. One night, around midnight, I received an urgent call to attend to a patient who needed immediate care. Although the location was about an hour away, I set out on the drive, navigating the winding dirt roads with my GPS signal going in and out. The light drizzle of rain added to the challenge, making the drive even more unsettling. Along one of these remote roads, I noticed a man in dark clothing standing beside a stop sign. He held out a knife, which sent a chill down my spine. Despite my car's headlights, his face remained shrouded in darkness, hidden behind what seemed like a mask. My instincts told me to exercise caution, but I continued driving, not stopping at the ominous sign. I managed to find my way to the patient's home without further incident. The family was waiting for me, and they greeted me with relief. I provided the necessary post-mortem care, noted the time of death, and stayed with them until the funeral home arrived. During our conversation, I shared the unsettling encounter with the man at the stop sign. The son of the deceased, a robust man in his 40s or 50s, kindly offered to follow me to the main road for safety, but I politely declined, attributing the incident to the oddities of the rural area. I dismissed the man at the stop sign as a potentially misinterpreted prank, or perhaps the actions of someone with a quirky sense of humor. However, when the funeral home staff arrived around 2:20 a.m., they mentioned seeing a man dressed in black on the road, seemingly involved in some late-night construction work. I recounted my story about the knife-wielding man, and we shared a nervous laugh. The funeral home staff offered to wait for me, but I declined, confident that I would wrap up shortly. They departed, leaving me to complete the paperwork and offer support to the grieving family. I stayed with them until around 2:45-3 a.m. I continued using my GPS until it lost signal again. To my surprise, the man from the stop sign reappeared, now watching me closely. This time I chose to drive past the sign without stopping, but my decision led me to an unexpected pothole, resulting in a flat tire. I pulled over, hoping the man was far behind me. While attempting to call for assistance and change the tire, I discovered my phone and iPad had no signal. The man and the previous eerie encounter came to mind, but I tried to dismiss it as coincidental. As I was about to loosen the bolts on the flat tire, I heard a noise from the field behind me. I froze, not daring to turn around. I could sense someone's presence just inches away, and when I finally turned around, it was the farmer I had noticed earlier. He had been working late, tending to his crops. He kindly offered to help me change the tire, and I gratefully accepted his assistance. With the tire replaced, I thanked the farmer and continued on my way. However, as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the encounter was off. The farmer's demeanor had been too calm, too composed for someone working late at night in a desolate area. Days later, I read a news article that sent shivers down my spine. The farmer who helped me change the tire had been apprehended as a serial killer responsible for a series of gruesome murders in the area. And it turned out my intuition about him had been right all along. I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been as cautious that night as I was. The encounter with the man at the stop sign, who had seemed like a potential threat, had ultimately saved me from a more sinister fate.
Livestock. My family had always owned a remote farm tucked away in the heart of the countryside. For generations, we had worked the land, tending to crops and livestock. It was a simple life, but it was our life. That is, until the summer of my 18th year, when our farming experience took a dark turn. It was a sweltering September day, and the sun beat down relentlessly as I toiled in the fields. My father and I were busy harvesting the corn, the dry stalks rustling in the hot breeze. The air was thick with the earthy scent of sweat and dirt as we worked side by side. We'd been struggling to make ends meet, with crop yields declining year after year. That summer, we were determined to turn our fortunes around. But no matter how hard we worked, it seemed like the land had turned against us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in the shades of orange and pink, my father called me over to examine something strange he'd found. It was a dead rabbit, its body contorted in an unnatural position, lying near the edge of the field. We both stared at it, perplexed and disturbed. It wasn't unusual to find dead animals on the farm, but this rabbit's death seemed different, almost deliberate. Its body bore no obvious signs of injury, yet it appeared as if it had been wrung out like a wet cloth. Over the next few weeks, more dead animals began to appear on our property: rabbits, birds, and even a few of our cows. Each one exhibited the same weird contortions, their lifeless bodies twisted and mangled. It was as if some unseen force was exacting a grotesque toll on our farm. Fear and paranoia crept into our lives. My father and I stayed up night after night, armed with flashlights and weapons, determined to catch the culprit responsible. But we found nothing. No evidence of any intruder or predator. As the weeks turned into months, our farm continued to suffer. Crops failed, and our livestock dwindled. We couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent had settled on our land, something that defied explanation. One fateful night, as a fierce thunderstorm raged outside, we heard a guttural sound coming from our barn. My father and I grabbed our flashlights and ventured out into the tempest. The wind howled, and rain battered against us as we approached the barn. Inside, the scene was a nightmare. Our remaining cows were no longer, and their bodies were there contorted, just like the other animals we found. My father and I were both overcome with shock and despair, the toll on our farm now complete. We never did find the explanation for what was haunting us, whether it was a group of mischievous teens, a cult, or something beyond explanation. In the crops. The sun came down on our family farm, and the air shimmered with the promise of a bountiful harvest. The days were long, filled with the rhythmic hum of tractors and the soothing rustle of corn stalks. But one autumn, a chilling experience on that farm would leave me with a horror story to tell. It was late September, and the cornfield stretched for acres in every direction, their stalks reaching for the sky. My father and I had spent hours that morning tending to the crops, sweating beneath the sun. As we worked, we noticed something strange, a sickly sweet odor hanging in the air. We followed the scent to the edge of the cornfield, and what we discovered turned our stomachs. The lifeless body of a deer, tangled in the tall stalk. Its eyes stared blankly, and a swarm of flies buzzed around the gruesome scene. My father shook his head in disbelief and turned to me, saying he'd never seen anything like this. The deer's body was untouched, no signs of predation or scavengers. It was as if it simply keeled over and died in the field. We knew something was wrong, but we couldn't put our finger on it. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences continued. More animals turned up on our farm. There were no signs of injury or disease, only that unsettling sweetness in the air. One evening, I was making my way back to the farmhouse when I heard it, a faint whispering. I froze, straining my ears to catch the words. It was as if someone was murmuring just in the fields. My heart raced as I followed the sound, my flashlight cutting through the thickness of the crop field. The whispering was definitely coming from the cornfield, and my father was already there, his face pale with fear as he stared at something in the distance. In the light, we saw them, figures, shadowy and indistinct, moving amongst the corn stalks. They whispered incoherent words, their voices a chorus that made us scared beyond belief. We didn't wait to find out who or what they were, but we turned and fled from the cornfield with our hearts pounding in our chests. We never looked back as we sprinted to the farmhouse, slamming the door shut behind us. That night, we locked ourselves in and listened to the whispers from outside. We never learned the source of these voices or the cause of the strange deaths on our farm. All we knew is that something went terribly wrong, and that farm was no longer ours.